Hey friends, Cherie here. Welcome back to the channel. Recently I put up a video showcasing this really lovely collection of fabrics called Harmony by Carol Gavin for the Conservatory Craft and Free Spirit Fabric. Today I'm going to do a sew along for a free pattern that they have on the Free Spirit website. I will link to it or you can search for it. I figured it'd be a fun quilt top to sew along with you all. Here's what we're going to be sewing. It's a really, I think, interesting quilt. So this is rated at the advanced beginner skill level, which is what I consider myself to be. I've sewn a lot of quilts. I've quilted a lot, but they've all been kind of basic. I haven't done a lot of intricate piecing. I've never done paper piecing, English paper piecing and things like that. So I thought this would be a fun one as an advanced beginner to sew along in case there are any beginners or advanced beginners that also want to try something like this. So we can sew this together and see how it turns out, all right? So yes, this quilt has a lot of fussy cutting. It's using all of the prints from the Harmony collection. And I'm a fan of fussy cutting. I love the big bold prints, and that's usually what I do the fussy cutting with. But even with these smaller prints, we're going to be doing fussy cutting. So let's dive into this sew along. Quilt kit is cut. I want to just go over with you what I needed to cut out. For the quilt panel, that's fabric A, and we needed one panel. So that's what I cut here. Fabric B is the Somewhere in Bluebird. We needed 1 5/8 yards of that. Fabric C is Little Somewhere in Plum. We needed a 1/2 yard of that. Fabric D is Scattered in Blueberry. We needed 3/4 yard of that. Little Scattered in Clear is fabric E, and we needed a 1/3 yard of that. Fabric F is Harlequin in Bubblegum. We need 3/4 yard. Fabric G is Harlequin in Grass. We needed 1 1/2 yard cut of that. Fabric H is Jungle in the Hot colorway. We have 5/8 yard of that. Fabric I is Jungle in Maze. We have 7/8 yards of that. Fabric J, Bundles of Joy in Robin's Egg. We have 1 3/8 yard cut. Fabric K, Bundles of Joy in Magenta. We have 1 1/4 yard cut. Fabric L is Dappled in Candy, and we have 1/4 yard. Fabric M is Dappled in Guava, and we have 5/8 yards cut of that. Fabric N is Clever Climbers in Key Lime, and we have 1 1/3 yard cut. Fabric O is the Little Clever Climbers in Cream, and then the final fabric for now is the fabric P, which in the pattern they're asking that you use the Designer Essential Solid in navy. I'm actually sold out of the navy right now. I had another blue that blended pretty well, but then I thought, you know, with all these flowers, I need a polka dot. So I decided to pull this Cave Facet Spot in the colorway Indigo. And so, yeah, I think this is going to mix in with these fabrics really, really well. And let me just show you how nice it looks with the panel. And I should say this is for the binding. So all the other fabrics will be incorporated into the patchwork piecing of the quilt, but this 5/8 yard cut is only for the binding. And so it won't be incorporated, mixed in with the fabrics, okay? And then the final 2 fabrics that you'll need on here, well, really one, is whatever you're going to use for your backing. And I haven't decided that yet. So if you're using a 44-inch wide fabric, like here they're suggesting that you use this same key lime fabric for your backing. It's 44 inches wide, so you're going to need 4 1/8 yards. If you get a hold of a 108-inch wide backing, which I do have some of those in stock that might, I'm thinking about one that might look good with this. you'll only need 2 1/8 yards for your backing. I'm going to get this pieced, and then I'll be thinking as I go what I'm going to do with my backing, and I will share that with you all, okay? Okay, so I'm now on page 3 of the direction PDF printout, and I've already printed all the templates, which are here, and it's telling me to trace the templates onto plastic or another sturdy material and cut out on the outer line to make the templates. And so that's what I'm going to go in and start doing now. Okay, so I just want to pop back in real quick because I was cutting out this paper and I was thinking, like, I'm cutting this out just to retrace it and to transfer all of this information onto cardstock. So yeah, I'm not doing that. I went and I got 5 sheets of cardstock and I just put that in my printer and I reprinted those last 5 pages. So on my printer, it was pages 13 through 17. But just, you know, check on your printer what it says. I rechecked my 1-inch spot. All is good. And now I'm just going to cut this out directly on my cardstock. And so I don't have to do any tracing. I don't want to spend time tracing. I want to spend time cutting and sewing. All right, I have cut out all of my templates on this nice sturdy cardstock. And just note they're not templates for all the fabrics, just for certain ones. So we're here now technically at step 3, and it's telling you to make squares and rectangle templates for fussy cutting. And it's going to tell you the sizes for each of the fabrics. So for example, here for fabric A, it's telling you to fussy cut your panel. And it tells you how to do that. To go in, you need a 21.5-inch square. And so you just want to cut that so that your little floral motif is centered. And I'll show you those steps, but I just want to talk you through it a little bit. The next one is fabric B. And so this is one where you would make your own template, or you would go ahead and, you know, kind of draw your a box for cutting. I have clear rulers, and so I'm going to be just pulling out my clear rulers, and I have them in different sizes and different shapes. I also have this fussy cutting ruler, so if I need any 6.5-inch squares, I can use that. This one is a large, the outer is a 12-inch. I don't think anything gets cut that big. But yeah, I'll use my various, and I have some in different sizes too. So I'm gonna look through now and just make note of all the different sized squares and rectangles that I actually need to cut, so I can pull out any kind of rulers that are gonna work well. And then I'm going to prepare my fabric also, which is described here on page 3, is telling you to go ahead and starch your fabrics to prepare them for fussy cutting. You do that so that you don't have as much distortion and fraying. Some of them you have to cut on the bias. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to prep all my fabrics. I'm going to iron all of them and just starch them as well. So, okay, I'm going to get the fabric together. I'm going to make my list so I can pull out all the tools that I need, and I'll be back. Okay, so we got our templates cut out. I've reviewed the directions. I know what I need to cut out. I've gotten all my fabrics starched. Again, the starching is to help prevent fraying of your raw edges as you cut out your different rectangles and squares and template pieces. And so now we're going to start cutting. Our first fabric is fabric A, which is our panel. And so the panel comes with 2 of these exactly the same centered motifs, right? We need to trim this down with the design centered. So if I have my little ruler here, 21.5 inches with this centered, cutting off the raw edge on this side. Here is 21.5. And so that's not, yeah, So that's basically right down the center of the fabric. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that first. I'm going to cut off this raw edge, and then I'll fold it on top of each other, making sure I find the center point to have that square cut out. And I'm going to go ahead and trace all of this first before I cut it so that I don't make a mistake. Okay, so here is our center panel motif, and making sure you square it off nicely, okay? So I'm going to put that aside. Okay, so fussy cutting around to get out that center square of fabric A was pretty straightforward, right? Now we're going to go into start to cut the other fabrics. Some of them we're going to be cutting strips, but a lot of them we need to do some fussy cutting. And so, as I said, we've already prepared our cardboard templates that were included. You can trace those, as I said, onto clear template plastic or film, if that's easier for you. I just use the cardboard, or not cardboard, cardstock printouts, and I have those all cut and ready. And now with these rectangles and squares, I'm going to either use my clear ruler to shape some, and then for others, I might go ahead and make the templates. So for B1 and B2, I'm gonna go ahead and cut out rectangles in those dimensions. So let's go over what we need to cut. We need to fussy cut 4 each rectangles that are 6 3/4 tall by 7 5/8 inches wide. That's rectangle B1. So I'm going to create a rectangle that's that size. And we want to capture the upper right corner of the rainbow. So that's what we're going to follow this layout here, zooming in to see, how they are placing their template. So we capture those motifs within our square. Then next we need to cut 4 6 3/4 inch by 7 5/8 inch wide rectangles that are B2. So we're going to use that same template that I create. And for there, those are the B2 rectangles. So you can see they're just positioned a little bit differently. And so it's just placed a little bit differently, kind of offset from B1. And then we need 4 6.5 inch squares, which is B3. And we need those cut on point. Basically, we're capturing the bouquet centered. And so this is where I'll probably just use my ruler to trace, because it's a 6.5 inch and I know I want the bouquet centered. But you could go ahead and, create a little templates in those dimensions as well. I have a 6.5 inch clear ruler. So I might use that too. But yeah, do what you need to do comfortably to get these cut out. All right. All right. So we got our somewhere prints fussy cut. I have 4 of each of the rectangles, and then I have 4 of these 6.5 inch squares cut on point. So we'll put this aside, and then I have all of this fabric left over. Again, I was actually a little bit more efficient in cutting my fabric and not spreading things out as much. And again, I'm really just showing you this. Kits are going to often come, especially these kind of kits that involve a lot of fussy cutting. You're going to end up with a lot of leftover yardage. And I could see that on the image of the quilt versus what, the amount of yardage that came with the kit. And so anyway, I just kind of put my things together, making sure I could get, it centered the way I needed to, but just cutting it a little bit differently than the layout. Because as I said, I'm going to be using these scraps that are left over for a bonus project. And so this is a pretty nice chunk of this somewhere fabric. Okay, so now we are on fabric C, which involves fussy cutting. This is our little somewhere print. And so we need to cut 4 5 1/4 inch squares. If you happen to have a clear square ruler, that's that measurement, do that. You can use your clear ruler, which is probably what I'm going to do, and trace around it. You could also, like we did here, when we did the fussy cutting for fabric B, you can create paper templates for those squares and use that to cut it out. But you just need 4 of those, all right? So fabric C is cut. I did go on and make a 5 1/4 inch just paper template for this one. Traced it and cut it out. It is time to cut fabric D. And so for fabric D, we have a template that we're going to be using, D1. And so for D1, we need to cut 4. And then we need to do the mirror image, which is D2. So that's basically, we're going to flip that over. Remember, following that arrow, making sure that's pointing up. We'll do the mirror image, flipping that over, and we need to cut 4 like that. And then in addition to cutting D1 and D2, we need to do a sub cut. We're going to cut 4 3.5 inch by the width of fabric strips. And then from those strips, we need to cut 4 3.5 by 21.5 inch strips. Okay. And then we also need to cut 4 strips that measure 1.25 inches tall by 12.5 inches wide. So I'm going to do the sub cut first, get those strips cut. I'm going to cut these 4 strips, and then I'll use the rest of the fabric to place the template to get 4 of D1 and 4 of D2. Okay, our pieces from fabric D are cut. We did our fussy cutting using the template provided. And then we got our strips that we needed to cut as well. And then here's the chunk of fabric that is left over. Next, I'm going to be cutting fabric E. Here we need to do a sub cut. We need to cut 2 pieces that are 3.5 inches by the width of the fabric. So 3.5 inches tall by the width of the fabric. And then from those 2 strips, we need to cut 24 3.5 inch squares. So let's get that done. All right, so fabric E is cut. We have 24 3.5 inch squares. And this is what we have left over. So if we make any mistake, we can come back and cut out more squares if necessary. But again, going to the scrap pile. So we've moved on to fabric F now. And this one is going to be fun. We can actually get to choose the butterflies that we want to feature. We need to cut 12 3.5 inch squares where the butterflies are centered. So again, we get to decide which butterflies we want to center. It's looking like it's capturing most of the smaller ones. You know, this one here is more than 3.5 inch squares. So it's going for the smaller ones so that you can actually see the full butterfly. So that's the only note I will make. Oh, no, it's not true. It looks like it captured some there. But again, it's our choice. So I might do like 6 of one and 6 of another. We'll see.
Appalachian sunrise meets my skin. Even with my eyes still closed, I can feel it coming in. Golden, golden, I'll follow only golden, 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 golden things. Mountain laurel high fives for miles in spring. Rainbow trout and a hummingbird wing. Golden, I'll follow only golden, golden, golden things. Gold hair, gold rings, gold leaves, gold anything, golden, I'll follow only golden, golden, golden things. walk up the river by my sun. Feet step over splinters of the moon.
Okay, so here are my butterflies. I cut a couple extra, and you can see here I have plenty of fabric left over. I cut mine a little bit differently once again, so that since I'm gonna have scraps, I wanna have as large chunks of scraps as possible. So I kind of cut all mine from one side of the fabric instead of just going all skitter scatter and random. And this is gonna go into the scrap pile for future use. Okay, so we're moving on to fabric G now, which is our Harlequin fabric again, but in the grass colorway. And just like we did for the pink butterfly fabric, we need to be cutting 3.5-inch squares. And we're going to be centering again around our choice of butterflies, just like we did before with the pink. And with the pink, we needed 12 of these 3.5-inch squares with the butterflies. For this fabric G, the green colorway, we need twice as many. So we need 24 from here. All right, so I did 26 3.5-inch squares with the grass, our Harlequin print. And I just figured I'd show you guys this. For this one, I went on and drew out my 3.5-inch square template. And then what I did to line up so that my butterflies would be centered is I just folded it in half, and then I laid that fold point right at the center point of the butterfly body, and then opened that up for tracing so that I could do my best to have it centered. If you were worrying about the height, like if you were struggling with that, you could also fold it this way too, right? So you could have it in a quadrant like this, and then place it, and then, unfold so that's centered, and then unfold so that's centered. That's just a little tip, if you really want to try to get those centered. And then because of the way I cut my butterflies, I basically focused on the lower portion of the fabric, working my way up. I ended up with this huge chunk of grass. I ended up with this huge scrap, which will definitely get put to use. Here we are going to cut fabric H. And for fabric H, all we're doing is we're going to be cutting 2.5-inch strips by the width of the fabric. We need 7 of those. So that's going to be an easy thing. I'm just going to lay this out and cut straight across 2.5-inch strips. All right, so fabric H is cut, again, 2.5-inch strips with the width of the fabric. And then I accidentally cut one 2 inches, wasn't concentrating, and then I have this big chunk left over. So these go to the scrap pile, these go to my quilt fabric pile. It's time to cut fabric I, which is this gorgeous jungle print in maize. As you can see here, we're going to be using templates I1 through I6. And we need to cut 4 of each. And again, we're just going to be cutting them out, laying down the template pieces to capture the motifs as indicated here on the cutting diagram. All right, so we have all those template pieces cut. Remember, we had to do I1 through 6, 4 pieces each. And then I forgot to mention that we also needed to cut out 1 piece of fabric, a subcut that was 5 1/4 inches by the width of the fabric. And then from that, we needed to cut 16 2-inch by 5 1/4 inch pieces, and that's what these are here. And then here's my bunch of scraps left over from that print. We have reached fabric J. Again, got to do some fussy cutting on this one. We have 3 template pieces provided, and it's the same thing for, so we have J1, J2 will be the mirror image of J1. We have J3, J4 is the mirror image of J3, and then we have J5, okay? And so again, I'm just going to lay these out following the indications here, the way it's mapped out on this diagram. You know, I have to look at the iPad where I've downloaded this to really zoom in to see what kind of floral shapes they're trying to catch. A little bit harder for me to see on the printout. But just, you know, make sure you're trying to follow that as closely as possible. All right, let's get this cut. Okay, so my 5 pieces from fabric J are all fussy cuts, and I need to cut 4 of each of those. So those are all set. And then here is my bundle of scraps, again, going to the scrap pile. It is time to cut into this gorgeous fabric K, which is Bundle of Joy in magenta. And we need to cut some rectangles. So if you've made your templates, you've marked them. Again, I'm just going to trace with my clear ruler. So here are my 4 rectangles with the posy or the bouquet on the left side, and then here it is with it pointing right side up on the left hand side. So again, these are mirror images of one another. We needed 4 each, and then got a huge chunk of scraps again from this. And I'll show you, this is part of why the kits come with extra fabric, because even though I had recorded myself saying it, somehow when I first laid it down, it made sense for me to kind of center that posy. So after I cut 3, I remembered, oh no, I need to have it to the left and to the right. And so I will use these in our little bonus project. But again, want to show you why these kits are often, especially when you have to do this kind of fussy cutting, they'll often include extra fabric because you might make a mistake. Next, we're going to cut into fabric L, which is dappled in the colorway Candy. And so we need to do a subcut where we're going to cut this down to 5 1/4 inches tall by the width of the fabric. And then from that subcut, we're going to cut 16 rectangles that are 2 inches wide by 5 1/4 inches tall. All right, so our pieces are cut. These are 2 inches wide by 5 1/2 inches tall. And these are the scrappy bits that I have left over, adding to the scrap pile. The next fabric we're going to be cutting is fabric M, which is dappled in guava. And what we need to do here is so they're calling this subcuts. So for the first subcut, we need to cut 2 pieces of fabric that are 6 3/4 inches tall by the width of the fabric. And then for the third subcut, we need 1 piece that is 4 1/2 inches tall by the width of the fabric. And so then we're going to cut those subcuts down into the final squares. So from the 2 pieces that are 6 3/4 inches by the width of the fabric, we're going to cut 8 6 3/4 inch squares and 8 3 1/2 inch squares. And then from the subcut that is 4 1/2 inches by the width of the fabric, we need to cut 8 4 1/2 inch squares. All right. So I'm going to get the strips cut, and then we'll cut them down into the squares. Okay, so the subcuts are done. This is the piece that I have left over. We're going to put that in our scrap pile. This is our 4 1/2 inch wide strip. That's the width of the fabric, so 44 inches wide. And then we have 2 that are 6 3/4. So I'm going to cut these down to the corresponding squares. And again, with this part, I'm just going to use my clear ruler and my rotary cutter. If you made the little templates for the different size squares and rectangles, or if you happen to have, rulers that are to those dimensions, you use those, but just get them cut, okay? Okay, so fabric M is cut, dabbled in guava. These are my 8 4.5-inch squares. Then I have 8 6 3/4-inch squares, and I have 8 3.5-inch squares. And then these are the scrappy bits that I have left over from trimming down the subcuts. And so I'm going to add those to my scrap pile as well. It's now time to fussy cut our fabric in, which is our climber fabric, the larger one in key lime. And so we have here 2 templates that we printed out that we need to use for this fabric. You need templates N1 and N3. And then to do N2 is actually the mirror image of N1. So you flip this over to the side. And I'm going to go ahead and mark this as N2. And then this is N3. And then N4 will be, I already marked that one. It's the flip of that, okay? And then you're just going to follow the orientation as shown here. So for example, when you cut N1, you need to have it facing up like this. I put a little marker here to indicate where to put it relative to one of the flowers. And then you'll look here. I've already traced mine. So again, I'm using my disappearing pen, laying down the template and tracing them all per the layout. My layout is a little bit different because your layout is going to depend on where your cut of fabric is, right? So this layout is based on the cut of fabric starting at this little floral thing. But say your fabric cutout is with the birds already there, you might not be able to fit this. So you got to move it down. And so I went on and just made sure you're basically cutting 4 of each of these. And then you're paying attention and noting if you're fussy cutting around a bird or the flower section. And that's indicated here on this pattern cutting layout. And let me see. You'll see better when you print it, or, you know, if you just download the PDF and look at it on the screen. N1 and N2 are capturing flowers in the same flower, just in different directions. And then N3 and N4 are capturing birds, and same thing. N4 has the birds facing to, this is my left. And then N3 is going to have the birds, because this is flipped, the birds will be facing to the right. So I'm going to get these all cut out and I'll show you, again, I've already traced them. I'm going to cut them out and I'll show you what they all look like. Okay, so here's the Clever Climbers in Lime, which is fabric in, all fussy cut. Here I have 4 in the shape of N1. And then the mirror image of that is just flip it over. So I have 4 as N2. And these are the ones that are centered around this floral motif. And then we have here, this is N3. So we have 4 of those. And then N4, the mirror image, just flip it over. These arrows, remember, again, are indicating the direction. So this is the top, right? So pay attention to that. Don't accidentally flip it like this. That's not the mirror image. So again, N3, and you simply flip it straight over. That's the mirror image, N4, okay? And this is the one that's featuring the bird. So you can see here on N3, the bird beak is facing in towards what's my right. And then here on N4, they're facing in, which is pointing towards my left, all right? And again, all indicated here as well. And then you end up with all of this fabric left over. As I said, because of where my fabric is cut off, I laid mine out differently. So I ended up with this large chunk. But as I mentioned, we will have some bonus projects using up these scraps, so don't despair. Okay, so the final fabric we're going to be cutting right now is the fabric O, which is the Little Clever Climbers in cream. We have 1 1/8 yards, as I mentioned in the beginning. And here, according to the directions, we need to cut a total of 8 pieces. We're going to fussy cut them. So I'm going to have the clear ruler. I have my disappearing ink marker again. And our rectangles need to be 5 1/4 inches wide, 15 1/4 inches high. 4 of them need to be centered with the bird beaks facing towards the left. and then 4 need to be cut with the bird beaks facing the right, and that's what they're indicating here. So I'm going to carefully use my clear ruler and make sure that I'm lining it up and marking according to the diagram, okay? All right, so those are cut, and I just want to point out here again, you know, be careful, make sure that your birds end up facing into each other when you lay your strips down, and try to get your segments lined up so your birds are at the same point, right? This is a repeat, so when you cut, like, you don't want your birds here on one side and then down here on the other, right? So just make sure that you are lining things up. So what I did is, after I traced and cut out one of these, I took it down to do these where the birds are facing in towards what's my left. And I just lined it up so that the birds and the flowers would be at the same point, so that they would really be true mirror images of each other, okay? So just wanted to point that out so you're careful about that when you're cutting, if you want to have it lined up nicely. And actually, I was a little ahead of myself. The actual last fabric to cut is fabric P, which is the binding. Remember, I decided to use this navy dot from K Facet instead of the plain navy blue design essential from Free Spirit. I'm sold out of that, and so I'm using this polka dot. Plus, I just think the polka dot's gonna be fun with all those prints anyway. And so we need to cut 7 strips that are 2.5 inches by the width of the fabric. And so I'm gonna use my clear ruler and my rotary cutter and get those strips cut. Okay, our binding strips are cut, and we're gonna put this aside. These will be the last fabrics that we'll use after we get the quilt top done and get the backing, get it layered, get it all quilted, and then we'll be adding the binding at the very end of part 2. All right, so it took me a couple hours, but everything is cut. So I have everything grouped together. I'm gonna go and start to set up for the piecing. I'm gonna set up my sewing machine station, have everything all set, get the thread. I'm gonna get a bunch of bobbins filled up so I can just sit and enjoy the sewing process after a couple of hours of tracing and cutting. So that's the end of part 1 for this video, and I'll see you back here for part 2, where we will start to stitch this quilt together. I'm excited to see how it turns out. Take good care.